I'm very well. How you doing?
I'm doing well, thanks. How has everything been for you in the past week? Well, just it's only Tuesday to be fair.
Yeah, not too bad, not too bad. And you?
Yeah, I've been doing well, thanks. So today I'm speaking with Stephen Watson, founder of Stack, a platform that's been curating and distributing independent magazines globally for almost 2 decades. What's really interesting to me about Stack is that it sits somewhere between distribution and editorial, and I wanted to explore how that's evolved over time. So it'd be really great to hear more about your journey and how founding Stack came about and what led you to that key moment.
Sure. Okay. So, well, as you say, it's nearly 2 decades ago, so that's quite a while. So,
Wow.
I was working as a magazine writer and editor, and I was kind of getting a bit worried because journalism was changing really fast. And so at that point, I was editing in-flight magazines, and I remember very clearly when I started doing that. Every now and then we'd try to get kind of a big name writer to contribute, and they'd just be like, no. Like, why would I write something for an in-flight magazine? And by the time I left there, like 10 years later, we were getting pitched on a regular basis by writers who, you've seen their bylines in like the Sunday papers or kind of big national magazines. And so basically I was like getting scared because like I was not a big name writer. How was I supposed to survive in this world where it was getting harder and harder to make a living as a journalist? And so I basically decided to try to start a business just as a way of kind of giving myself a new set of skills, like sort of teaching myself some things by doing it. And so I went and bought a book called The Beer Mats Entrepreneur, which is all about how you go from sitting in the pub with your friend and going, oh, I've got this idea for this thing and it would be really great. But then, how do you go from that idea to actually putting the pieces together and making it happen? And so it basically just walks you through sort of like how to write a business plan and do all of that stuff. And I started trying to come up with ideas for things, and I wrote a couple of business plans that were quite clearly not going to do anything. And Stack was the first thing that seemed to make some sort of sense.
That sounds like an amazing process for you. I think nowadays, when people are building businesses, there's always that sort of evolution of thought where you're thinking, is this really going to land? How are people going to resonate with it? Is it something that can stand the test of time during different markets? And I was listening to a talk that you gave a few years ago where you described the explosion of independent publishing and how tools like Kickstarter and Creative Cloud open things up. But also, it created this sense of content excess. And it feels like we've moved from that moment of explosion, but we're now heading into a landscape which is far more saturated. At what point did Stack move away from being just about distribution and start becoming more about taste, editorial authority, and defining what indie actually means at the wider scale?
I mean, I suppose Stack has sort of always done that because the idea has always been that I choose magazines that I think more people should read. So, kind of by definition, there's a lot of taste involved in that. I mean, honestly, Stack was set up the way that it is in the first place just to make it easy to run because I was still working in my in-flight magazine job. In fact, I'd gone down to 4 days a week doing that. And the original idea was to try to get more bylines in The Guardian and big places like that. And after a year, I was sort of like, well, I've done a few, but not really more than I was doing when I was working 5 days a week. That's when I came up with the idea for starting a business. So, the whole idea behind Stack of like everyone gets the same thing really in the first place, that was just because I could manage that. I could handle that. I could have like one spreadsheet with everyone's names and addresses, and another spreadsheet with literally just cells filled in to see like how many months worth they've paid for. And every month just do a mail merge and send it out. Like that mechanism actually has become the thing that people love the most about Stack. People love the fact that it's a surprise and like they don't know what they're going to get next. So I would say that sort of like kind of taste part of it has always been there, but it was kind of an accident, really. My main motivation in starting it was just like, look, there's tons of great independent magazines out here, and people don't know that they exist. So what can I do to kind of try and help expose more people to more of those magazines?
That's a really interesting perspective, and I think it really does stand out that you're sort of looking at a gap there, which might not otherwise have been filled if you hadn't been in a position where you were writing as a journalist for the Flight magazine and that you understood the mechanisms of how to actually bring something to life from the methodical setting and that you were able to apply that to your business. So you mentioned that success isn't just someone buying a magazine once, it's them subscribing and staying. How do you protect that level of depth and intimate world building and sort of distinctiveness as you scale without moving to what's more accessible or commercially obvious?
The idea really is that when we send you a magazine, hopefully you've never heard of it before. And so you get this full surprise of like, oh my God, I had no idea. So here's the magazine we sent out this month. This is a magazine about languages and translation. Oh my God, I've never heard of linguaphile before. And then as you're flipping through it, you're like, wow, this is like opening me up to like whole new worlds. Clearly, that's not going to happen if I send out a magazine that you've already heard of. So it's kind of like intrinsic to what the project is really that like Stack is never going to be mainstream. And that's kind of a shame because
Mhm.
it would be nice to make some money at some point, but
Yeah.
Stack always will operate in the fringes and in sort of like the sort of strange places where you might not yourself in your day-to-day life, you might not be spending a lot of time looking at that sort of thing. But then we can hopefully come in and just drop this one magazine in front of you. And because of the nature of a magazine, they're so good at kind of welcoming a reader in and sort of taking them by the hand and leading them through these stories. So, like for example, I for a while subscribed to the Rough Trade album club, so I'd get like a vinyl record sent to me every
Yeah.
month. Taste is like such a specific thing, and like you like it or you don't like it. Whereas a magazine is there to kind of open itself up to the world. And it's got all of these nice little tools in there, like kind of pictures and headlines and pull quotes and all this stuff that is intended to make reading it just like fun and as pleasurable as possible. So I think, again, this wasn't like a master plan at the start, but I think that, luckily I'm doing this with a medium that really suits being put in front of someone who might not have come across it before.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I mean, I think that now with the rise of social media, AI, and everyone scrolling on their phones and, introducing something that's a lot more tactile that people can take their time with and use as a, sort of a way to engage more with whatever area they find inspiring. And, it's not often that you're able to feel a sense of what's going on globally. So being able to, have something arrive on your desk and have that constant stream of inspiration, I think is definitely a great place for many creative entrepreneurs, designers, and a lot of the people that I've also worked with in my career as well. We're always looking for new ways to expand our knowledge bank. And I think Stack is effectively a layer of curation within the editorial ecosystem.
Exactly. Also, the thing that I hear a lot is that it functions as a break from that other stuff. So, look, I spend like all day looking at screens and like so do lots of people. So when it comes to the end of the day, if I'm given the choice between reading something as a PDF on a screen or reading something printed on paper that's been designed to look really nice and feel really nice, I'm obviously going to choose the latter. Stack is definitely it's in there providing that kind of inspiration for people, but then it's also providing a bit of a break, like a way to switch off.
Definitely. I mean, it would be really interesting to get your perspective on what it actually means to curate the culture when everyone has access, and theoretically, everyone can technically be an expert or someone who creates a magazine overnight. I mean, we've spoken about all these platforms that now exist, but now the trust element is something that, is very difficult to attain within your audience. So it would be great to get your perspective on that.
Yeah, I mean, look, people who subscribe to Stack are kind of a self-selecting group. They're people who say, I want you to send me something that I wasn't gonna find myself. So that's like a nice group of people to be like serving with these magazines. I think also you've got to see it in the context of the wider culture. And you mentioned AI just then, and that's like, I mean, obviously everyone's talking about AI for everything. But I think also just
But
the way that social media works these days, like, you see stuff on TikTok and it's so unmoored from like our reality that we live in. Like, you could be watching like a meme that first came up like 8 months ago
yeah,
and like it went away again, and then for some reason the algorithms like picked it out, and so then people start making stuff in response to that because that's how they then get attention. And
yeah,
the whole thing just feels so, I mean, speaking for myself, feels so genuinely bewildering. Like, even with loads of people again have like had that experience of, oh, have you seen that video? Because you're like trying to show it to somebody, and then you're like searching back and trying to find
for
the
yourself.
video that you actually are talking about, and all you can find is other people like sort of with their version of it stuff. It's like it's baffling. I
Yeah.
I find it incredibly hard to get my head around that. By comparison, like I don't know, like 100 odd pages of a magazine which have been printed and bound and delivered to you, that's not going anywhere. That's not changing. And I think that there's something powerful about the fact that when you see a magazine, and nobody really thinks this way, but like implicitly, we know that's an archival medium. Like, that if you stick that magazine on the shelf, it will still be there in 10 or 20 years, and you can come back and be like, oh, look, that's what people were talking about at that point. That I think is really reassuring to people because it's not going to sort of like disappear and change. And in terms of like, the sort of trust around media, I think, a lot of the problem that we have these days comes from the fact that a bunch of politicians in particular have just realized that they can just deny stuff. You just say like, no, 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 that's fake news. Didn't say that. Didn't happen. And it's actually really hard to sort of like backtrack and prove things. So I
Mm,
think that I think print has a role to play there as well in terms of just providing these like solid foundations for a culture where, if you look at this magazine, you're looking at exactly the same magazine as me. It's not like we're looking at an
yeah.
algorithm and you're seeing one version of it and I'm seeing another. I think there's something kind of essentially human about this. And I think that we're like living through this moment where we're sort of realizing that's how all media used to be. And actually, it's becoming the exception now rather than the rule.
Wow, that's a really interesting take on it. As someone who's into vinyls and collecting music as well as magazines, it makes a lot of sense that something that predates you and can be handed down is something that evolves beautifully over time. And not many things do that, especially with social media, where something that gets shared a few moments down the line fades and it, changes its meaning. But at least with tangible magazines, you can actually look back and say, this is what was being said at the time, and there's no other iterations of that, which I think
Totally.
is really reassuring. So, what would you say is the criteria, and how do you ensure that there's enough variety to reduce the sameness, and how do you navigate sort of the environmental implications of print?
So the main thing that our subscribers want is to be surprised. So that means as I'm planning the year, I'm generally about 6 months ahead of where we are now. So as I'm planning the year, I'm going like, okay, we've just sent I mean, this is a bad example. We've just sent a translation magazine. I won't send another translation magazine. There aren't
Right.
many of those around anyway. But like, if say we'd just sent a food magazine, then I'd be like, okay, we're not going to do another food magazine for like maybe 6 to 12 months because I want to make sure there's that variation in terms of the subject matter. We also try to vary it in terms of where the magazines are from and like the parts of the world that they are covering. And even stuff like, if we've sent out quite a sort of text heavy magazine, then I'll try to make sure that we're sending something a bit more visual, just so that there's always this sort of like variety and
Right.
it doesn't become predictable. In terms of like how I do that, like practically with the magazines that are out there, most of these magazines publish maybe like once or twice a year. There are some quarterlies out there as well, but so really like once you kind of boil the year down, like when I've got my sort of list in front of me, I want to make sure I send this magazine and this one. You look at when their publishing dates are, the year sort of picks itself, really.
Right.
There are lots of great magazines out there, but when you try to put all of that into a calendar and like make sure you've got a new thing coming every month, like yeah, there isn't tons of choice. So the year sort of kind of sorts itself out. Um, and I think you asked about the environmental
Implications.
implications.
Yeah.
I mean, look, there's no two ways about it. Like when you're printing a magazine, you're using resources, natural resources. There are a bunch of decisions that can be made to make something have a smaller environmental footprint. And actually, it's interesting. I think that if you look back, say maybe 10 years, it like the kind of cliche of an independent magazine around the sort of like late 2000s. So I'm thinking of the time of kind of like Serial Magazine and Kinfolk. If you were going to say like, okay, draw me a picture of an independent magazine, you'd draw this big, thick, heavy thing with
Yeah.
beautiful, thick paper, loads of white space on the pages. And actually, you don't see so many of those these days. And I
True.
mean, there are clearly lots of reasons for that. But I would say that one reason is paper is like much more expensive now. So if you're going to have a lot of white space, you're spending a lot of money to have that white space. Um, I think people generally have like a greater awareness of environmental impacts. And so, that if you're printing a magazine that's going to weigh like a kilogram, that's going to take a lot of fuel to move it around the world. And so all of these things kind of come together. And I think it has led to more people making more smaller, lighter, thinner magazines. But I really get excited about that because for me, the interesting thing is always the idea. It's like, okay, well, what's the idea that's motivating this person to get out of bed in the morning and make a magazine? And then how do they go about translating that into ink on paper? And sometimes that means you're going to have like a big, beautiful, extravagant production. But sometimes it means you can have like a really small, light, humble production and do something that's just as impressive. So yeah, I think, like I said, there's no you can't say, oh no, paper's fine. I mean, paper is, in terms of materials, it is very well recycled. So when you do come to throwing a magazine away at the end of its life, there is like a good sort of route to it being recycled and reused. And obviously, anything that is being stored in the cloud or online has a huge amount of hidden emissions that come from
Mm,
like
true.
the
Yeah.
data centers. There's no two ways about it. If you're gonna make something that's gonna take resources to do it, I think the important thing, particularly with independent magazines, is make something that people are gonna love. So if you print 5,000 of them, you sell 5,000 of them, and people keep those things on their shelves forever. And then you've got an amazing use of those resources rather than print a load of copies and actually they don't sell, they get pulped, and people look at it once and throw it away. That's a very poor use of resources.
Right, that's really interesting, and I like the fact that you sort of tied in meaning and how these magazines are understood. So it'd be really interesting to hear your thoughts on if getting great magazines in front of the right people is still the core issue now, or has the challenge now shifted more towards how it's actually understood and in the curation process and what the meaning is behind it.
I think it's harder than ever to reach people these days. If I think back to when Stack started, we got a ton of attention out of blogs. Just like, people like kind of writing stuff, not because they got paid, but because they were really into it. And like, yeah, we did really, really well out of that. And I don't think that really happens in the same way now. Like if someone's like really into something, maybe they make a podcast about it or like a YouTube channel or something. But obviously, all of those things exist on platforms which are controlling that person's access to their audience. So I do think it's really I find it much harder these days to like cut through and connect with people. So I think, and I know that I'm not alone. I know that like, independent publishers, probably their main challenge is how do they get their magazine in front of readers who are going to
Right.
appreciate it. So I think that's kind of the thing that everyone's struggling with. And I'd like to think that, Stack can help with at least a little bit of it.
Great. I mean, this conversation in general has got me thinking about independent publishing as it becomes more powerful over the next few years, hopefully. And would you say that this is through the sense of distribution, community, or something else entirely? And what do you think is currently sort of being misunderstood about what actually makes something last?
I think an independent magazine always starts because someone's got something that they really care about and
Yeah.
they want to sort of like present that in a way that other people are gonna pay attention and value it. So, again, like there's so if you're into something now, you could like make videos about it or whatever. But and that's totally valid. I think that people who choose to do it with a magazine are like they want something that is going to be physical and tangible and that's going to last. So I think that's kind of the reason why people start them. I think in terms of how you make that thing last, that's much harder. I mean, it's much easier to start something
Yeah.
than it is to keep it going. Um, I mean, like money obviously is a huge part of it, and lots of people these days are feeling pressured economically, and there's no two ways about it. Making a magazine is a relatively expensive thing to do. It's like way more expensive than making a podcast, way more expensive than making a lot of types of like social media content. Um, so I think it is about that. Like it's about figuring out who your readers are and where they are and how you're gonna reach them, how you're gonna get in front of them. And like so, for example, I definitely don't want to make it sound like I think I've got all the answers here because I really don't. Like, I would really appreciate lots of ideas for how I could get Stack in front of more people. But for example, we started a thing last year where basically I'd been to a little theatre project that we were donating free Stack magazines to
Brilliant.
because they just asked it one day. And I like finally got around to visiting them and was just blown away by what they were doing. This is like this place in Hammersmith, sadly not there anymore, but they were doing such good work and like the magazines were really prominent. And it's just like, oh my God, this is like brilliant. This is exactly where people should come across Stack. And so we decided at that point to sort of make a campaign of it and like reach out to independent venues in the UK and say, look, if you want a Stack subscription, just let us know. We send the magazines for free. We send like a sheet of stickers so that which got like QR codes on so people can say that they came from Stack. And so then hopefully you're in your favorite local cafe or like cinema or theater and you see this magazine, it links back to us. So that's kind of like this little sort of like
Yeah.
loop that we put together. And then this year we were like, okay, let's do phase two of that. And so we realized that actually it was cafes that had done the best for us. So I came into this from like a theater, so I was sure that like theaters and cinemas, like people go there in this like expansive frame of mind, and that's the right way to discover a Stack magazine. Actually, what works much better is someone goes and has a coffee and then like they're sitting there for 10 minutes, and so a magazine fits really well into that little bit of time and they can read a magazine and discover us. So we're like, right, okay, focus on cafes and go for it. And we made a little campaign again, and I put an Instagram post up a few weeks ago and it got like sort of 100 odd likes or something. And then I did it again a few days ago, but with like a text slide on the first one, just going like, independent cafes get independent magazines.
Yes.
And I think it's like the best thing that we've
That's
ever
great.
done on Instagram.
Yeah.
And it's like got, let me just get it
Yeah,
right.
go for
Because
it.
I mean, also, I just love
Definitely got
looking
to
at this
get those
post.
get those views.
So we're now at 1,500 likes, and
Oh wow.
loads of cafes across the country have been in touch, going like, "Yeah, we'd love to have it there," which is just like brilliant. And
Brilliant.
it's this rare thing of like, okay, how can we get our magazines in front of people who are going to be interested in them? Which, we've used Instagram to do this, but now we've got all the cafes signed up. We're not dependent on Instagram still showing our stuff to people.
Yeah,
People will be like in their favorite little local cafe, and once a month they'll see a magazine arrive,
that's
which
great.
hopefully they'll link back to us. So,
Yeah.
like, I think that's a good example of like just having to do things in like lots of different ways to get yourself in front of the people who are going to care about you.
Yeah, I think that's it, isn't it? When it comes to layering different contexts. So that lifestyle piece where it comes to independent cafes where people are more in the frame of mind to grab a coffee and sit down and actually take their time to look through a magazine definitely resonates with me as someone who loves to go to independent cafes. And it's like that's the moment in time where you have someone's full attention, and it makes sense that it appeals to cafes that are also independent, so they follow in that ethos. And it's just such a great coming together of two different businesses that can collaborate in so many other ways. But did you find that brands understand how to work with platforms like Stack in a way that preserves the editorial integrity, or would you say that there's still a gap?
We've done very little stuff with brands over the years.
Right.
We did, like when Google launched the Pixel 2 phone, someone got in touch with me out of the blue and said that they wanted to send out like something to like all of our subscribers, and like that was great. We
Right.
made for the I think the only time in Stack's history we actually made some money that year, so
Yeah.
that was really good. um but no, I mean we've done very limited things with brands, really, because again, like Stack is all about small independents, and I think we've got to be very careful about like how that is presented to people. So, the Google thing like really worked. I don't think there are that many brands that like it just would naturally work for us to do something like that.
That's really interesting. I think the idea of moving from access to meaning is something I'm exploring a lot through modern day made across publishing, film, and brands. And it feels like the challenge now isn't as much about the creation, but creating something that people actually return to. So I have one final question. So if everything you're building continues on its current trajectory, what does it become known for?
Um, I hope Stack is known for being an alternative to the mainstream, and in whatever context that is. So that could be, if the mainstream is becoming more and more digital, Stack is known for sticking with the analog media. If the mainstream is known for becoming more and more polarized, then I hope we are known for sharing like a real breadth of views. Um, and just kind of showing that, like, it's all of these magazines are made by these like tiny groups of people who are incredibly passionate about what they're doing, and they want to share that with the world. And I think that most of the time is a very kind of positive way to see the world. So we're not in the business of sending out magazines that will tell you that everything's great and everything's fantastic.
Mm.
That's not what we're here for. But it just so happens that because of the people who are making these magazines, I do think that they're sort of there's a more hopeful picture of the world that emerges from these magazines than when you turn on the news or you you listen to what's happening with Donald
Mm,
Trump, whatever he's doing
yeah,
today.
definitely. I mean, I also had another question that springed off that. What would you say is your biggest demographic outside of the UK
Do you mean in terms of
audience?
regions? The
In terms
US
of
is our
regions,
second
yeah.
biggest.
Okay, that's interesting. And after the US, what would you say is the most interesting and culturally diverse magazine that comes outside of the UK and the US?
Gosh, the most interesting and culturally diverse magazine. So there's not published in the UK or the US.
So that's not within your UK and US demographic.
There's a magazine. I mean, this is sort of it's jump into my mind because we sent it out in January.
Yeah.
But there's a magazine called Debris, which is published in Australia,
Oh,
and it's not like it's interested in showing an Australian point of view on the world, but it also goes much broader than that. And like there's an amazing story in it about the like homoeroticism of like the world's biggest oil wrestling tournament in Turkey, and
wow.
basically the writer who goes there is a gay man, and he's just like outraged that in his view the hypocrisy of the Turkish state means that all of these men who are there watching these big, strong, muscly men all like oiled up and like grappling with each other. He's like, this is obviously homoerotic. I think
Yeah.
why can't we just enjoy it for what it is? So that's a very strange way of saying that I think that's probably the one I'd go to.
Brilliant. I love that. So before we close, I'm asking each guest to leave a question for the person that I next speak to, based on something you think that they should really consider. It could be something that you're currently questioning yourself on, or something that you think the industry hasn't caught up with yet.
Oh gosh, that's quite a tough one. So I would say, why do you do what you do? What is it about whatever you do that makes you want to like get up every day and keep on doing it?
Brilliant. Great. I'll carry that forward into the next conversation. But thank you so much for this conversation. It's been such an incredible time just hearing about your journey and more about Stack. I'll definitely be putting a link to your magazine in the description box, and hopefully we'll catch up soon. And I'd love to hear more about what you've got in store.
Perfect. Nice to meet you.
Brilliant. Lovely to meet you. Take care.